Are protests really grassroots, or is someone funding them? Find out on the Middle Ground Mic.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Middle Ground Mic. We got a great guest back on here today, Adam Swart from Crowds on Demand. I almost said Crowd Control. He's been a guest on this show before. He's a great guy, honest, upfront. He's very open, and that's what we kind of desire here. So that's why I reached back out to him, considering everything that's been going on, to see if he would come back on the show. And he's gracious enough to give us some of his time. Adam, thanks for coming back on.
Hey, Joe, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you. And congrats. You were just telling me how big this thing is growing, this platform that you've been building. So congratulations on that growth and your success in that regard.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, the one thing a lot of viewers say is they really enjoy the fact that I can have a conversation with someone like, a Crowds on Demand, or somebody who, depending if they went on some other networks, right, it might be like in a gotcha or an argument session. And I'm more about, let's talk about it. Let's see where everybody's at.
I agree. I think gotcha journalism is not a good way of journalism. I think, look, it's reasonable to ask people tough questions, but you gotta let them respond. One challenge with cable news is you got 5 minutes for a segment. Sometimes it's 3 minutes for a segment. So in 3 minutes, it's very hard. You want to get your 30-second soundbite of the 3 minutes, or even the 20-second that then you have on YouTube or other platforms that goes viral. So you're trying to create a certain type of moment, and that's not always conducive to the kind of dialogue people want in a more substantive format. So I appreciate that, the long form of what you do, and I'm excited to be back on your program.
No, and it's a great thing. We were talking a little bit about Minneapolis, and that's kind of part of the reason why I wanted to have you on. So I had, gosh, I'm terrible with her name, but we'll call her, I believe it's Dahlia. She's running against Ilhan Omar in Minneapolis. And, we kind of got on the ICE subject a little bit. Naturally, if you're running in Minneapolis, that's going to come up.
Yes.
And, she kind of stressed, she's like, hey, it's not as bad as they're making it out to be. It's mainly just a couple streets. And then I heard, and this is what really got my wheels turning, is that part of what was going on there, George Soros, supposedly, I can't think of the foundation's name, was behind some of it. And then CNN had a lady going on, I'm being paid to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going, what? And I mean, I knew, some from our conversation, how some of that went. I was just like, I'm like, man, I know Adam can't be behind, these people trying to shoot each other.
No. Let's break it down let's break it down in detail. So number one, you first have to separate, whenever you talk about protests, from peaceful law abiding from non peaceful or non law abiding, right? So I guess I should say first that we're not involved in, and even though a lot of the protesters are peaceful, it's just too risky of a situation. And I'll get into it in just a minute here about why I feel like both the protesters and the ICE agents have, I think, not conducted themselves well in what I've seen of the situation, and being removed from it so I can comment objectively on it. So first of all, let's separate peaceful from non-peaceful, right? Or like law-abiding from non-law abiding, right? So if you look at Renee Good, right, she was in this was the young woman who was in the car, right? And she was involved in an illegal form of protest, right? She was blocking ICE agents with her vehicle, right? So that I think everybody can agree on. So the question is whether the ICE agents use the appropriate force in dealing with that situation, right? So I think that's a legitimate topic of discussion. Now, I am not a forensics expert, and I have seen the video from a couple angles.
Quick pause for a second. A lot of people ask what gear and resources I use for this show. So I put everything in one place: the microphones, books, anything that I use, tools behind the scenes for the Middle Ground Mic. And if you want to check it out, the links are in the description. Using them helps support the show and keeps conversations like this going. All right, let's get back to it.
It did to me, from a casual observer, I look like that did not need to happen, right? I don't know. It's not for civilians to necessarily comment on it, other than to say what seems clear to me is that there needs to be de-escalation on both sides, right? So the core element is you have protesters who are escalating, How are they escalating? By blocking ICE agents, literally by cursing at them, right? Cursing at an ICE agent is not illegal, right? But blocking their path is illegal, right? So these are escalatory actions, right? So the ICE agents, you have to keep in mind, are not local law enforcement. They are not trained in protest dispersal. Like if they're trained, it's very minimal, right? So generally, the police. So I've dealt with a lot of police in always in respectful, convivial manner. Typically, when they have an issue where protesters are blogging, let's just say they're lying in the road. Well, first of all, they try to tell them like, look, you're not allowed to be here, right? You got to get up, right? You really
Right.
got to get up. You give them every chance to extricate themselves from the situation. And then, even then, you use the minimal force necessary to get them out. Why? Because this is the United States of America. We have First Amendment right to free expression. So you have a right to protest. So the idea of the police is not to hurt your right to protest, but rather to help you protest, but to make sure that it's done lawfully. Now, the problem with the ICE agents is the protesters are obviously protesting them. They take it very personally. They're very aggressive, right? The videos that I've seen have been that the ICE agents are not de-escalating. They're like, yeah, motherfuckers, you know what I mean? You're gonna come at me, I'm gonna come at. Well, that to me is not professional
Right.
law enforcement, right? So this is not a bar fight. I expect more from the ICE agents to be able to sort of say, hey, look, you need to be able to do your own. You need to be able to, if you're going to do crowd control, you need to be trained in how to do that, right? And kind of, this is not Saddam Hussein's Iraq, you know what I mean? You don't just like see a bunch of protesters and fire your gun in the air, to disperse. This is what happens in a third world country, right? But
Right.
in America, that's not how we deal with it. So my kind of feeling is I really feel like it on both sides, it's been very poorly handled, and you need more de-escalation training for both. Now, I come down a little harsher on the side of the law enforcement because I don't expect protesters to always conduct themselves with decorum. I expect law enforcement to do that. That's what they're paid to perform themselves with decorum. Now let's get to the issue of the paid protesters, right? So, yes, are there people probably being paid for this? Well, that needs to be examined. There are certainly people being paid indirectly for it, right? So, in the sense of maybe these are people through academic programs or other jobs where like your job is to protest, right? So like maybe that's not technically your job, but it's basically your job. So yeah, I mean, I think all these people need to hold themselves to a higher standard. And I have even published what's called the Protesters Bill of Rights and Responsibilities and the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights and Responsibilities. And if you want, my associate will send you a copy.
Yeah, I
Um,
love it.
and because we are this is something that's very important to understand is what people have a responsibility to do to conduct themselves appropriately in these situations.
Yeah, and it's not easy. They, especially in that the Renee Good situation, when I was watching that, if it really kind of felt like a no-win situation with how violent it was getting. It felt like nobody in their right mind was going to win, right? And her wife was sitting there telling her to drive, not knowing what's on the other side of that car, that agent's right there. So it was just, and I remember seeing, I don't know if it was the guy recording it himself, but it was kind of like a bystander. And it was after everything had shoot, the wife was going, "Oh my God, it's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault." And I'm going like, man, why can't we just step back? Go,
Yes.
okay, you know what? Let her get down the road. Then we're going to go get her. You
Well,
know, re-
this is my take. Exactly. This person is not a serial killer, right?
right.
You know who she is. You have her effing license plate. So if she did something that's illegal, you're the United States government. You think you can have an arrest warrant? You have her license plate. You know where she lives. You know where her wife is, right? So if she did something illegal and you have an arrest warrant, you have cause to do that, then by all means, like take that necessary action. But I think that it's sort of the same thing with that cops have been getting in trouble with over high-speed police chases, which are kind of generally cool to watch in those movies, like that movie Bullet from the 70s with Steve
Yes.
McQueen. Like, great movie, great chase, but this is an extremely dangerous thing. Like, yes, if you're talking about somebody who's extraordinarily dangerous, then that may be necessary. But in this woman who it seems like was guilty of being an extremely irresponsible protester and blocking law enforcement. Yes, that may be a crime, but that is a crime that doesn't need to be, tackled that particular second. So I think the urgency issue is a good point that you make, Joe. That and I think the problem is the ICE agents, because they're not trained at this sort of thing. When I talk to police on site for protests or any kind of event, right? They always start talking to me by acknowledging that we have the right to First Amendment expression and that they are there to help us with that. They always say this, right? And I always tell them when I'm there, and I always instruct my associates to tell them that we are peaceful, lawful protesters committed to expressing our rights within the bounds of the law. So we are looking. The thing is, I always say there's no excuse for an illegal protest in a country that gives you the latitude to protest. Like, we're not England. You're not going to get arrested for thought crimes here, at least not now. You know what I mean? So we're not a third world country, right? So you have the right to protest. So we should expect that people do so lawfully.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's not easy for the law enforcement. I mean, and even the protesters. I forgot I don't know if it was Portland or there where they had the lady goes, "I'm a paid agitator." She was very specific, and I'm going, so you're putting your life on the line for like $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is that you're going to get paid.
Not about the money for some of those people, though. The money is just sort of the excuse. They're adrenaline junkies. They want to, like, a lot of these people are basically what I call them professional agitators. They like to agitate. It doesn't matter what the cause is. They just want an excuse to stir up chaos. I mean, it's a very small number of people, of course, but they're people that can have a bad effect. Big other picture, Joe's, both protesters and cops should remember that a small number of violent protesters and a small number of bad, brutal cops can ruin the reputation of all protesters and all cops, right? And that is a problem. So one of the other things that I'll preface that's in kind of relevant to this subject is that I'm not saying snitch, but take on bad actors in your organization. If you are a protest group, right, and there's somebody there who is not committed to your principles, let them know that you don't want them at your protest. You know what I mean? If you are a police officer and you have a colleague who is being engaged in police brutality, let them know that that's not acceptable and that you're not just going to stand by and watch while that happens. Right? So, I think there's a difference between that and snitching. Like, in an ideal view, what you can better do is guide these people to the light, guide those people to doing the right thing. You know what I mean? Because I get it. No one wants to snitch on someone who is their friend. But what you should at minimum do is let them know that, like, what they're doing is not acceptable and you're not just gonna stand by while they do those things.
Yeah, I mean, and then it's not acceptable, and people need to hold themselves to a high standard, no matter who you are. I had a gentleman on back in, I believe it was October, and he was, because technically one of the big myths out there is people need to know is Antifa is not an actual organization. It's more of a movement, and people. It's kind of like the Gazna flag, right? People buy it, don't tread on me, hang it up. There's no actual organization; it's just something people identify with. Well, he was part of Antifa Portland. We'll just say it like that, and he literally he goes, "I'm okay with political violence."
Well,
And
that's a
I said, "Well," I said, "That's kind of where we separate, you know?"
Well, yeah, I mean, and I'm not okay with that at all. And one kind of disturbing trend has been the number of Americans on both political sides that basically say that political violence is okay or acceptable. You know what I mean? And I think it's important. I think to a lot of people, the horrific events with Charlie Kirk were a wake up call, but I don't think it was enough of a wake up call. I think people need to understand that Like, I don't want to live in a country where everyone is walking around armed with bodyguards, you know what I mean? And where,
Right.
like, there's a beauty in the idea that a congressperson is like, the whole concept of for example, a congressperson is the people's representative. You're among the people. But if Congress people don't feel comfortable and safe exercising their responsibilities, I'm not saying you don't, you know, ask them questions in public. You should. If you see a congressman, you should ask them questions, and tough ones if you want. But but they should not feel unsafe physically, in public. And same with all these other figures. And I think you've seen way too much of that because there are people like that who say that they are okay with political violence, right?
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie, I never thought that I would see the day where people be like, "Well, yeah, I'm okay with beating somebody up for their political beliefs." I mean,
Yeah.
growing up, I grew up, a little bit post Ronald Reagan years, the Bill Clinton. Nobody would have. You'd have had 90% of the country going, "What are you doing?" They would have turned against you,
Oh, they
and
would have.
now it's acceptable.
Well, what's interesting, Job, is that in people's personal lives, I don't think this is how people conduct themselves. I think there's this like kind of online warped world that creates a warped personality because I have a lot of friends who are Trump supporters and a lot of friends who are very much on the opposite end of that. And they, I'll host events with my friends and they'll see each other and they probably don't discuss politics a lot, but they know each other and they know where the other one stands and they're all fine. So like on a personal level, I feel like people don't support this. I think that this is the effect of the media bubble, which is kind of an oft discussed thing, but it's more important than a media bubble. We're talking about social media. And social media to me is a cancer. It is a cancer. These social media companies make money on dividing people. I'm sure you know people. I know people who've been driven completely down a right or left wing rabbit hole through social media because it radicalizes
Man,
you. They see it
too
the lo-
many.
the more you spend, the more valuable you are to them as a user because they measure the user engagement for their ads, right? That's how they make money. So, and by the way, just a little real question for you, Joe.
Hmm?
What do Elon Musk, head of Twitter, Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, and Reid Hoffman, who I believe is the founder of LinkedIn, have in common?
I would not know.
They are all contacts of Jeffrey Epstein. They were all in his emails.
Wow, I heard about
So
Musk, but I did not hear about the other two.
so Mark Zuckerberg, and Reid Hoffman all were connected to Epstein. Now, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting anything untoward, but they knew who he was. I mean, this is a guy who's a convicted, of what he's
Right.
been convicted of. And my understanding is they all associated with him well after that period. Um, so it's interesting. So I guess the analogies I would use is what did Jeffrey Epstein do? He groomed people. What
Yeah,
does social media do?
grooms people.
So
Yeah, I've had
I honestly personally think all three of them should, there's this Epstein committee that has been interviewed Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, right? I believe that all three of those men should be questioned by this committee on what on earth that they had to gain from Epstein. Because by the way, what I'm like, okay, with Bill Clinton, if anything, I get it. Like it's a private jet, right? Like, but Musk, Hoffman and Zuckerberg are all extraordinarily rich, far richer than Epstein. So what on earth did Epstein give them of value is what I want to know, right? Um,
I would suspect because I believe it was in Epstein's email. I believe that one Democratic congressman, I don't know if it was from the Virgin Islands or wherever, she was trying to get dirt on Trump in the middle of the hearing, texting Epstein. So I'm wondering if they were trying to use him as kind of, where do I get my information from?
possibly, you know what I mean? But that is some. I don't feel like either any of them deserve the benefit of the doubt. They deserve to be answering questions under oath, is my opinion.
Yes.
But I think, is it not interesting that I think the largest social networks, the heads were all connected in some way to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, no, in the social network part, radicalizing people. there's a protest group here in Michigan, not like group, but it's like a group on Facebook, I should say. And, I'm sitting there, ICE just bought a center and they're turning it into a detention center not too far. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to go there and maybe try to talk to people, see if we can be reasonable. And I posted, I said, it was the group. I said, hey, would anybody want to meet up while you're there and just have an open and honest conversation? Just be, "Oh, well, if you're not 100% against it, you're a Nazi, you're a communist, you're this, you're that." And I'm like,
It's probably not a
okay,
smart tactic. First of all, it's
yeah,
not a smart tactic because you have to build a movement, and sometimes what you have to do is you have to build a disparate movement. I mean, for example, what's kind of interesting here is like they call it a horseshoe theory, right? So you've got right now you got Trump who's prosecuting this war against Iran, and there are people on the left who oppose it. But what's interesting is there's also people on the right who strongly oppose it. The Tucker Carlson, Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, if you want to put Nick Fuentes in there, right? Like, so, if you have, sometimes what you have to do is you have to make common cause with people who may disagree on a lot with you, but you can say, hey, this is an issue where we are kind of in agreement, right? I mean, the Epstein files is a great example. You had Democrats and Republicans come together on that issue.
yeah. One of the few times in our lifetime, well, probably I would say since the 2000s that we've seen them all come together in such unity since 9/11. I mean, everybody was pretty much, hey, we're all on board. And I thought that was a good moment. And I was kind of hoping maybe it will spark something there. But yeah, that was about 5 seconds short lived. And they were right back to the usual rhetoric. So when it comes down to the protesting, how, if let's say you're one of those people that live in Minneapolis, Portland, which seem to be actually, before I go into that, I'll ask you this. Why is it with those two cities, specifically these days, that things seem to go from normal to crazy? And the reason why I'm asking that is they've done ice raids here in Detroit. Nothing, people aren't getting shot. Nothing like this is going on.
Well, let's talk about Portland first. Portland, one thing that Portland has is you have a group in the city who are extremely radical left, but you also have kind of this area, like kind of rural Oregon, and the people kind of in the outlying areas, some of them are quite radical right. So Portland, I think, has been the showdown for some kind of confrontations between Antifa and some of the kind of far right groups. So that has kind of been a part of it. Minneapolis has been a lot more surprising because Minnesota, so Portland's always kind of been known for this, for having this. I mean, ever since I've been politically aware, there's been this kind of dynamic, right?
Okay.
Minneapolis is interesting because I'd spent some time in Minneapolis like prior to 2020, and it's always just kind of a peaceful, sort of sedate, a little bit boring city. And then ever since the George Floyd matter, it's really just gone kind of crazy. I mean, first of all, one commonality they both have is they've both engaged in the defund the police movement, which is one of the worst possible movements. It is
Yes.
it is it is one of the most dangerous ideas that I've ever seen in my lifetime. Why is it dangerous? Well, it's not only dangerous because you're going to have an upswing in crime, because you will, but you're also going to have increased vigilantism, right? So I'm sure but maybe your audience needs a primer on the Kyle Rittenhouse matter. So Kyle Rittenhouse was a young man. I think he was 17. Was he 17 at the time of the incident, or 16?
Yeah, I believe he was 17 at the incident and 18 when he was on trial.
Right. Okay. So you basically have in Kenosha, Wisconsin, you have the police who basically completely disengaged from the city. Right. So the city is burning, right? And the radical agitators are just looting, burning, whatever the city. This kid comes in and he sees himself as a hero, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna do it, right? And he's 16, 17, he's trigger happy, right? So he wants to kind of get in the mix and help, right? And then he is showing down, has a showdown against these kind of total nut jobs, right? But my point is, this is a symptom, whether you agree with Rittenhouse or not, he should never have been in this situation or in the first place, because it shouldn't fall to a 17-year-old kid to defend property. It should be the police that defend property, right?
Right.
Because this 17-year-old kid is not trained. So the kid is going to do what he did potentially, right? And whether you agree with it or not, and I'm not even going to wade into that because it's too controversial, but I'm going to say, I think we can all agree he shouldn't have been in this situation in the first place because if had the police been doing their jobs, right? But the problem with the defund movement is that ultimately you need police in order to protect the community. And without police, there's going to be high crime and higher vigilantism. And the result of higher vigilantism is going to be more unnecessary deaths, right? Because if the police come in numbers, people might back off. If it's some random guy with a shotgun trying to defend property, it could lead to an altercation and potentially even someone, you know, a intruder getting shot or even someone who's not a party to it being shot. And it's just like, that is so unfortunate. Again, I keep mentioning it, but we're not third world country. We're not Somalia. And that's not a diss against the Somali community, but we're not Somalia in this country. And why should you shouldn't have to defend your property personally in this country. You see what I'm saying? You should have the
1000%.
to defend our property, and it's much safer if they do it and if we don't.
Yeah, I mean, because what did George Bush call it when things were going crazy? We're not a banana republic here.
Yeah.
That's the word I was searching for. So outside of you, right? Because we know what you do. Who are some of in terms of not necessarily inside knowledge, but in terms of some of these things, who are some of the other players per se that people maybe need to go, huh? The ones that maybe you speak out against, right? Where you're like, hey, we need to be transparent. Who are some of those players?
Well, part of why I speak out is because I want to make it very clear that like to disassociate us with any of that because I'm in the business of persuasive advocacy. Now, I just want to make one point is sometimes people say, "Oh, well he's in favor of weak need advocacy." It's like, "No, absolutely not. You can be as I said, you have the right to be very forceful and enthusiastic in your beliefs. Like we did the delete Facebook protest. We've taken on big pharma. We've taken on big tech. We've secured, massive wins through peaceful, legal, respectful protests. So I just want to first say that peaceful, legal protest doesn't mean I'm going to protest in some field somewhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like when I deal with law enforcement, like sometimes we'll be doing a big event for a company outside a convention center, and the police will say, "Oh, can you move a block away?" And I'll say, "Well, respectfully, no, we can't do that, and we have the right to be here. So, with all due respect, we're going to stay here, right?" And I said, like, if you need to run it by your commanding officer, your commanding officer will tell you the same thing, right? So, just to be very clear, being peaceful and respectful does not mean that you aren't seen. It just means you're doing things within the realms of the law. So that's kind of a misnomer. But the other thing is that in regards to your point about bad actors, well, I have even made an offer, and I'm shocked that the Congress hasn't taken me up on it. But I've said, look, I'm willing to lead a task force to crack down with subpoena power on people who may be using money to either as like a way to use foreign interference in our process or to do illegal activity. So like I've made that offer. The challenge is that I need the subpoena power in order to be able to make some of these claims because there are people who I can speculate are behind this, but for legal reasons I can't tell you because I can't prove it because I haven't seen the records because I don't have subpoena power. But the
Right.
problem is that the people who are leading this don't fully understand how this industry works. So they are going about it completely the wrong way.
Yeah, and that's never good when they do something of that nature, going about the wrong, and they should. I mean, because they both sides, and this is what I said when people were like, "Oh, look what Trump does." Whether you believe he lost the election or not in 2020, what I thought was interesting is they played a clip of the Senate back in I think it was 2016, where so many people like House reps, "Oh, we should not certify this election," and it was on the opposite side. So then I started looking. There's always been this section of Congress every election where they're like, "Oh, this wasn't right. There was interference." And it was just kind of one of those things that got hyped up and everybody just went on the freight train with it.
Well, let me just say one thing about that is that there is people have the right to their opinions. It's really the actions they do with those opinions that are the problem, right? So you have the absolute right to believe that any election was rigged, even an election where someone won by 80%, you can say that was rigged, right? Um, the challenge is the action. So one of the big things that I have a big problem with is people treating people based on their views rather than actions, right? So whether it comes to January 6th or BLM, right? If you vandalize, you should be punished. If you hurt someone, you should be punished. But you should not be punished more or less based on the ideology, right? So if you vandalize a building in the name of BLM, the punishment should be the same as if you vandalize a building in the name of MAGA, right? Because at the end of the day, your crime is not believing that the election was stolen. Your crime is the vandalism. So I guess that's my opinion on that, is that it's important that in a country that has the free expression, that we separate our opinion on what they're saying with what they are, the facts of their actions.
Yeah, and I mean, well, I mean, when it comes down to it, that I think who is it? I can already see the comments you're going to say in there. Hey, both people should be punished. When I'll go on there, I'll say something like that on some of these comment sections, right? I'll see something be like, "Hey, man, this ain't right." Oh well, you know what? You're a communist, or a Nazi. I did a show with a guy who was an Obama White House fellow, and he's from Shanghai. I've been living here since he was 10. I got called I was a member of the Chinese Communist Party. I was a
He's American.
communist advocate. Yeah,
He's
these are
yeah, he's
yeah.
American. So that's
I'm
ridiculous.
like sitting there. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Obviously, that's ridiculous. He's an American citizen. So I think that name calling is your resort when you don't have an argument. So
Yes.
like when people resort to name calling, or that is just a sign that they don't have a better argument to rebut the claims that are made. I mean, it's even the same thing when people accuse each side of kind of compensating demonstrators. It's like, first of all, there's money on both sides in the political spectrum. So let's just be clear that both conservative and liberal are paying people, and have a ton of money. There are billionaires on the right and on the left. So let's dispel with this idea that that one side is genuine and the other side isn't.
Yeah, I wish they should send me and you on a campaign. The government should to put that out there. We
Yeah.
might not make it back, but
Well, I guess my take is that, well, hopefully, I mean, my take is when I talk to people, people agree with me. It's when people don't know you. So I do feel that the more dialogue you have, the more I think you can figure it out. I mean, I think we all know this to be true, but somehow it doesn't always see the light.
no, and I wish it would. It would make life a whole lot easier for everybody, really. And I I want to throw out there. I've never seen anything remotely once linked to your company where anybody's pointed the finger at it. At least from my end, nobody's come up and like, hey, but the one name, I always hear about the certain names, and I'm like, okay, it's like you always want to try to go with an open mind and perspective. But then you see the things like the Minneapolis, and that's why we had to get you on here, because I'm like, we've got to hear some perspective on this, because all you hear is, and as much as I'll be fair, CNN has kind of seen the mood a little bit back more towards the center these days.
Yes.
You know, they still it's the hype rage, right? Everybody goes after the hype rage, and if they don't have the hype rage, it's like they just automatically put their fingers in their ears and tune you out.
Yes, that's very true. And that's really unfortunate to me. Like, I think that the media has become so cowardly these days,
Yes.
in they never want to confront their own viewers with hard truths. That's the fact. Like, and I don't like that is occurring, that they are just trying to like circle jerk their viewers. That honestly feels like that's what each media outlet is basically. I mean, there are a few who I think will, like Bill Maher has a lot of left-wing viewers, but I think he'll tell them a hard truth. And I think
Bill Maher.
Tucker has a lot of right-wing viewers, and he'll tell them some hard truths. So there are some who will. I mean, I'm not saying I even agree with either of those people, but I'm saying most people tend to just tell their viewers what they want to know.
Yeah, and that's always the sad part. I wish, though, the one thing I'll say is Bill Maher does come out in his show and he goes, "Hey, I'll let y'all know the Republicans are willing to come on my show. The Democrats blocked me." And that was ironic because for a long time, my show was the opposite. Is I got people that were left leaning, if you want to call it, that were like, "Yeah, we'll come on and talk to you." But people on the right were kind of like, "I don't know about that." And I'm like, it's not a I got you session. It's literally, let's just talk about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important that I think these sort of cross dialogues are important. And I think for a few years we saw none, and now you're seeing a lot more kind of dialogue where you do have people of kind of opposing views talking. But I think that what you're seeing is where I think we have to figure out as Americans is where do 80% of us agree and where is there disagreement? Because it does feel like there are a lot of areas where 80% of us kind of agree. Like even like take an issue like abortion, right? You think of like, oh, are you pro-life or pro-choice? Well, the reality is most people understand that there should be some abortion allowed in certain situations, but it shouldn't be until birth, right? Like there's some place where you should allow abortion and some place where you shouldn't, right? And you figure it out. And what is it? The Bill Clinton, the safe, legal, and rare, right? That's what Bill Clinton said about abortion, right?
Yes.
And so I think 80% of America probably agrees to some extent, right? You know, so there's a lot of things like that. I mean, even with like the war, right? I would say my understanding is 70% of Americans don't want the war in Iran, right? Like that's my understanding, right? And so I think that there are consensuses that you see of people, but those consensuses aren't necessarily always reflected in the wider political system.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate. I wish it was a little bit more in line. I know your time's valuable. Is there anything you want to tell the public that they should know before we exit
Yeah,
this?
I do. I actually want to give your audience a free tip. So some free tips. So okay, so we talked a lot about advocacy, but most of you guys who are audience are not necessarily going to be advocating on a political matter, but you do need to advocate for yourself. So we're an advocacy company. So one of the things I'm like working on doing is telling people to be their own best advocates, right? So I'm kind of one of the things you have to do. So like here's an example. Like your flight it got canceled. You need a new flight. You're late on your rent and you don't want to be evicted, right? You're dealing with a problem, a medical problem, and your insurance company says they're delayed in reimbursing you, right? So these are things that like ordinary people, any of us could be going through, right? So first of all, what I recommend is identify who is empowered to help you, right? So uh, there's no point, for example, in screaming at a flight attendant about a flight delay, right? Because the flight attendant is unlikely to be able to assist you with a flight delay. They don't control that, right? Maybe in the case I mentioned about the about you being late on your rent, maybe the property manager won't be authorized to grant you an extension of time to pay the rent. So you have to maybe it's the regional manager who has that authority. So first of all, focus your efforts on the person who actually has the power because you're spending the time better that way. Number two, figure out what matters to that person and how to convince that person, right? Um, so that's important because uh, let's just say you're dealing with this regional property manager. Well, saying, "Oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do if I'm evicted." Well, that's not really their problem, right? That you would need to explain to them why they should do it, why it's in their interest. So maybe it's in their interest because they don't want to have to hire a lawyer and go through 3 months of court proceedings just to get you out only to have the place trashed. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not saying you threaten to trash the place to be clear, but that's a risk that they might have, right? So maybe they would rather say, "Hey, look, give me a month time and work me on a payment plan." And that's much better than having to do the alternative, right? So you they might be a very practical minded person and see it your way. And if you show them that you're credible, then they might be willing to do that for you. Right. But so you have to understand that you have to reach them the way that they respond to. So don't make it about you and why you need something. Make it about them and why they should help you. So, like, just a great example in my personal life. So, or in my professional life, I'm always traveling. You know, maybe 1 in 8 flights that I'll take is canceled, probably. So, what I typically do in that case is I tell them what flight that I look myself and I see, okay, well, what's the alternative flight that has a seat open? And I'll tell the customer service agent, book me on that flight. And even if it's on another airline, but I made their job a lot easier because I've made it very easy to solve my problem, much easier than not solving my problem.
Right. No, and that's critical. And I appreciate that. And Adam, I really appreciate you coming on to us, giving some of your time, and hopefully have you back down the road. I'm sure there's going to be some more crazy people coming up. There never seems to be a shortage of them.
Yeah, anytime. And I hope those tips help. And because we all kind of have to be our own best advocates. And that's really sometimes the more important than being able to advocate on politics.
Yeah, I mean, it's never easy. All right, everybody, I appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to check this episode out. Everything will be in the links you guys already know, and I hope everybody has a good day. All right, there we go. It should
Thank
stop
you.
right there. I
Awesome.
appreciate it, man.